Well, hello there and welcome to another episode of Tubb Talk, the podcast for IT consultants. Today, I'm speaking to Dan Adams. Now, Dan is a relatively new friend of mine. He's the chairman of New England Network Solutions, a Lowell, Massachusetts-based MSP, and he's also the founder of Upskill, a media and e-learning service for IT professionals. We're going to talk to Dan today, not only about managed services, but also IT professional growth as well. I'm really excited to speak to this man. Dan, welcome to Tubb Talk.
Thank you, Richard. Honored to be here.
Oh, and we were just saying before we came on air, we've had to do a bit of wrangling between the two of us with our busy diaries to get to the point where we can speak to one another as well, haven't we? So I appreciate the patience, but I think the audience are going to appreciate that patience as well, because having spoken to you a few times in other mediums and that, I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
As well, Richard. We should spend less time at the hairdressers and more time working and we're going to get together.
Let's jump straight in on that follically challenged note there. I'll give you a quicker background for the listeners there. But before we talk about your latest endeavor, I want to understand a little bit more about your background in managed services as a whole, and your probably best to say your evolving role at New England Network Solutions. So give us a bit more on that.
Yeah, well, I started out in the IT industry at a small company called Novell many, many years ago, back when dinosaurs ruled the earth. And I'm also a musician, and so there was a draw for me to continue my education. The only place I wanted to go to really was in Boston, called Berklee College of Music. So in that process, after working at Novell for a big chunk of time, I was on the team that actually put Macs on PC networks. So I was on the team that released 215C for those old dinosaurs who might be listening. And, back then it was just basically DOS. You were connecting DOS workstations together. So to get Macs on. And then the next team I was on was Portable NetWare, which tied Unix in. Came out to continue education in the Boston area and started an IT services company way back then. And it really started out of frustration that the current VAR I was working for was just pushing boxes. And so from that, early on, from the start, this was before Windows for Workgroups, before really Windows NT, OS2, all this stuff, really before that. And so I was fortunate enough to kind of be at the birth of networking and integration of systems to the business world.
There's going to be some of our younger listeners, dare I say, that's going to be like, what are they talking about? So let's do a little bit of a backtrack there. Novell NetWare, of course, I've been in the industry. I am had what's called the CNA, Certified Novell Administrator qualification.
Administrator, yes.
Administrator. I didn't quite get the engineer, the CNE.
Yeah.
But some of our more mature, more experienced listeners will be getting a kick out of some of the technology we're throwing around there. But it really was, wasn't it? It was the birth of networking as we know now. We've got TCP/IP now. Back then, I can remember IPX, SPX, and NetBEUI. And
NetBEUI prior to that, right? I actually put AppleTalk cards into PCs, and you used a phone line between them, an RJ11 between them. And that's, the old days before it even moved towards Ethernet, when you had ArcNet and all the other stuff. Yeah. So I started before the internet was even connected to anything. I started before TCP/IP exists, before email was a thing, before DaVinci Mail and all these other CC Mail and these other programs came out. The only things you could put on a network back then are WordPerfect and Lotus 123. And those were really the only two applications that existed in a network environment.
Well, I was going to say, for the benefit of our listeners, we always put together show notes for these shows where we include all the cutting edge modern links, and Gudrun, who does amazing work behind the scenes putting together the show notes. Gudrun's going to have a but she's going to have to dip into the history of computing, and she's going to say Novell Net what now? But we'll put some historic links in there. I will do that personally, so younger listeners can understand what the heck we're talking about. But Dan, so building on from that, I mentioned your evolving role at New England Network Solutions, which is your MSP. Tell us about how that sort of grew to there then.
So basically, when you start off as a solopreneur, as an individual, I was going to college classes, and then in between them I had a beeper and a stack of coins, and I was using payphone to call clients in between classes, and then I take the subway down and pop in and do support work. And so really I was everything, and started at the very bottom level. And then the company now is gone through phases, but now there's over 50 people, right? There's a CEO, there's a separate president, and I'm no longer involved in the day-to-day. So what's happened is I've been able to be involved in the evolution of an MSP or an IT service provider, or even back then, a support company. We've gone through different iterations, and pretty much have worn every hat in the organization and have had to transfer every hat in the organization off. So now I am just the chairman. So I do not have day-to-day responsibilities in the organization, and it's still growing. I mean, we're close to 20% clip, at least on an annual basis, still just doing phenomenally well. So it's a unique spot. Many offers to sell and exit, but no, that's not what we're doing at this time.
Do you know, given your backgrounds with HTG, Evolve, whichever name we want to, okay, do you know a mutual friend called Eric Thorsell at all?
No, I do not know Eric.
The reason I bring that up, so long-time listeners to the show, it reminds me, I had a great conversation with Eric, and he's in a very similar situation to you, where he'd migrated from tech to CEO to chairman and going through. And so for the benefit of listeners, I'll say, if you are interested in what that journey looks like, first of all, check out the interview with Eric Thorsell on Tubb. But secondly, Dan, perhaps we could get you back in the future just to talk about what that looks like as well.
That would be great, because I will tell you there's a backside to that. If you associate and your ego is tied to being a tech, which mine was, I had a huge cape and tights and I could solve anything. But as you move off, you have to start giving those tech hats away and focus on other things. And it can really hurt your sense of self and who you are, and you're moving away from that which you already do extremely well and are sought out for, into areas where you're not as strong, and it can beat your ego up aggressively. So I would be honored to come back, because that transformation alone is worthy of a bit of time.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, just as a side note, I've spoken to so many peers of mine, friends of mine, close friends of mine, who have sold their MSPs and then sort of floundered a little bit with what to do with the second stage of their life, which is another aspect of what we're talking about here. So
yes,
perhaps that's a conversation for another day. We'll have to get you back on the podcast to talk about that, Dan.
Would be great.
Where I want to focus on today is, we've talked about, New England Network Solutions. We talked about your career in the IT industry. You've just released your latest book, which is called The Tech Nerd's Guide to Career Success: 7 Proven Lessons to Unlock Your Growth in an IT Services Company. You were kind enough to reach out to me, offer me like a pre-release copy of it to take a look at, and it is a wonderful book, Dan. So I've got to say that up front. I'd highly recommend all the listeners go and check that out. But tell us, what led to you writing this book?
Well, like we just kind of talked about, where you're going through this transformation as an owner, and what are you going to do? As chairman, I get to sit in and on the executive meetings and the high level meetings, but it's different when you are running or you have a responsibility. Every time there's a problem, you kind of get punched in the gut, because I have to solve it. I have to solve it. I've been able to step back and say, okay, what's really going on here? What's the dynamic? Why are the mid-level managers seeing things different than the employees? And why are the executives having? So you start seeing these tiers and these layers. And it gave me some incredible insight to step back. It was just amazing. So I started seeing these patterns happen. And then the second part is if you've been around HTG, Evolve, or any other peer group, you'll hear Arlen or others talk about the journey of the owner, and they get to the end of the rainbow or closer to the end of the rainbow, and they start to see that where their business and what they hoped it was going to be for them isn't that pot of gold, or it isn't that happy ending they were hoping to get. So with that in my mind, as well as seeing employees, because for every owner, there's a dozen or so employees that have that same arc where in their career they get to a point they start realizing, I may not achieve everything that I was hoping for, or I may not have. So I started realizing there was some information that was just really missing, and some insight that was missing to what was really going on that would benefit owners, benefit leaders, and even benefit every service employee in the organization. And at that point, it became a crusade. It became something that I felt like, oh my gosh, there's too many incredible people that you feel your heart bleeds. These guys have, I mean, if you've been in the industry with anybody and you struggle through any things, you bloody your knuckles quick and you become brothers and sisters real fast. And you want to see them succeed. And that's really what this is. This is a passion project to help others kind of get a jump ahead and have greater success by knowing where the targets really are.
We should explain the book itself. So it offers some really strong practical advice, and it's in a parable story style format.
Yes, sir.
We follow Marty, a tech, on his career within an MSP. There's so much I want to dig into, but the first question I want to ask, was Marty based on anyone in particular?
So every mistake that Marty makes, I have made personally in spades. So the process was interesting because the first book I wrote was not for public consumption. It was a tech manual. It was bloody. It was hard. It was detailed. It was chock full of things that help, but it was not in a consumable format. And so I realized I'd written more about training and guidance in the book. And I had to step back, and I had an editing team that engaged with me and said, okay, we need to think about this differently. And so they're the ones that forced me down the metaphor route. I was going down the cold, dry manual route, and it wasn't going to get anywhere. So they're the ones that beat me up. They're the ones that it said, okay, you need to draw from experiences. And that's what really happened. The two core people you have in this book are Marty and then Chip, who is the mentor. And unfortunately, every mistake Marty makes, I own. And every MSP owner, unfortunately, and leaders probably owned them too. I've done nothing unique. These are things we all do. And that's why it's applicable, I believe.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons the book really struck a chord with me when I read it was exactly what you say. I've said about, before we came on air, you and I were saying we've been doing this a long time. I think it's about 20 years I've been in the managed service industry as technician, as an owner, and now what I'm doing. When people ask me what I do nowadays, I say, it's really simple. I just share all of the mistakes that I made to help other people avoid them. And I said, and trust me, there's an infinite source of content there just coming out of that. So the book struck a chord with me because I saw so many things that I did not only as an engineer, but got frustrated with engineers as an MSP owner.
Yeah.
And the book, I think, really connects almost the disconnect between what an engineer thinks they're there to do and what an MSP owner wants them to do. Tell us a little bit more about how you see that disconnect in your experience as chairman, as MSP owner, and as an engineer in the past.
I think that's really the big thing we talk about as an individual matures. So we could take the plight of the owner, we can take the plight of the manager or the employee. Each of these have their own arcs as they mature and go forward. But the problem is you're approaching a problem or approaching something you need to learn, you see it from one angle. And so you understand it from that side. And then once you get in it, you understand it from that side. But then as you have to exit it and you look back at it, you view it differently again. So there's really a metamorphosis multiple times through each of the things we go through, that each one can be a hang up that can stop us from moving on to the next point. And so if you're involved in a peer group, or you're involved, if you have a mentor or somebody and you're an IT owner, at some point you get slapped upside the head that this is really about being a business. This is about a company. It's not so much about tech support. And so as you start realizing this and you start changing your focus to be more business centric, you realize that the people behind you may not be business centric, and that causes that disconnect. And it's a problem because you now see the game differently than they do. It's not that they're wrong. It's just they don't yet see what the next level. And unfortunately, as an owner, there's generally a next level we don't see as well. I mean, it's because we're all kind of morphing and going through these different stages. And that's a challenge we have.
Yeah. I mentioned the style of the book is parable.
Yes.
That type of style there. In fact, it reminded me a lot of Bob Berg and John David Mann's seminal work, The Go-Giver, which longtime listeners to this show will realize I mentioned probably every single podcast. It's been such an influence on me. Are you familiar with the Go-Giver book, Dan? Was it an influence on what you did here?
So I don't want to disappoint you, Richard, but I'm familiar with it, but I have not consumed it. That is not a book that I have gone through, but the whole concept and the reason, and this is, you'll show a little bit of my ignorance, but it is my other friends have had this, and kind of explain. It's something that somehow natively and also with my upbringing and all this stuff, the concept of, karma, what goes around, contributing and you just give and give. So I didn't really feel like there was a huge void in what I was doing and with all the other things I study, and I didn't suck that book through. There's been other books that I was more focused on. But as you said this, yes, the parable concept was something that, I'll be honest, was forced to me by the editors. Because it's more relatable, and it brought me out of my engineering structure into something that, hopefully is a little more approachable and consumable.
Well, I think it works incredibly well. And I would encourage you. I know being around Arlen Sorensen, a mutual friend of ours, one of the people who connected us, you can't hang around Arlen without hearing about the Go-Giver.
Oh, no.
And likewise, you can't be listening to this show without hearing me talk about Bob Berg and the Go-Giver. I'd encourage you to read it. And
I will do so. And I appreciate it. But it's one of those things that, just being bluntly honest. And when you first threw the questions over, I'll be honest. There was part of me that's like, well, maybe I better read that so I don't look like an ignorant, but I will.
Well, you've got a flight coming up to the UK in a few weeks' time. Let's get a copy of the Go-Giver on your Kindle or iPads there and to read on the flight.
Get it done.
In about no time.
Get it done.
You'll love it. But let's get back to your book here. If I may, without giving the book away, everything on air here, I want to go through some of the lessons that you share, because you share a number of different lessons that are numbered with our reader that Marty picks up along the way. Yes. And so I want to delve into some of those because I think they're really powerful. And lesson number 1 was titled, "You're in the game of business." And you've already touched upon this here. As a former MSP owner, this really struck a chord with me. So can you elaborate a little bit more of what we were talking about how engineers think versus how MSP owners think? Because it's all about the business aspects, isn't it?
At the end of the day, when you start a company, you have aspirations that are tied to their business aspirations. You think, well, it might change my quality of life. I might have an asset. I might be able to be, a chucklehead like me who, can have a business that's giving him money and he's not there day to day, right? So you have all these aspirations, and then you have a talent, a skill that you think, okay, I'm going to leverage this skill to build this business. And the focus goes back to the skill, and you become so engrossed or so tied to that you forget the business side of it real quick. And so what happens is you kind of, your day-to-day of being a tech, and days just go by, and you forget about the big picture of what this is. And each of us have to go through this. And until you realize it, you're kind of shooting at the wrong target, and you are aiming, and you are prioritizing, and you are changing your life based on what you believe is most important. And almost everybody in our industry, we put tech first by default. And then we've been bopped on the head a few times, and we know, well, wait, customer service is important. We got to talk to the customer. So each of us have those two right hand, left hand fist grabbed around customer service, and technology. But that doesn't guarantee business success. I mean, we know people that are great customer service, great techs, but their businesses aren't doing well. So that top rule of at the end of the day, it's got to be business savvy. It's got to be business smart, really has to be our North Star. And tech and customer service and a few other things we might touch on are parts of it, but the North Star is it's a business.
Yes. And I think I can give a great example of that I have talked about publicly before, which is when engineers are, of course, they want to help customers. They want to do what's right by the customers. I had an engineer who was like a bulldog working on a ticket for a client on a Windows mobile issue. So I'm showing age there. Windows Mobile doesn't even exist. But when I finally got the issue fixed for the client, but when I checked afterwards, the engineer had spent 20 hours working on this ticket. And I had to pull the engineer to one side and say, well, you did a great job there helping the client. However, do you realize this contract is just not profitable for us? We've made no money this month as a result of you spending 20 hours rather than going down a different avenue, escalating, reaching out to help the vendors. So it's like a really stark example there, but perhaps a good example of how the engineer feels as though he's got to focus on one thing and the MSP owner needs to put those sort of boundaries in place to make sure it works for everybody.
You are so dead on with that. In fact, one of the things in my training I talk about is the services success quadrants. And that we really don't touch on it much in the book. It's more in the training, but that's the idea that there's 4 key components that are necessary in IT services to succeed. The first one's tech skill. The second one is people skills, right? We've got to get along with somebody. We can't just be a great nerd. Well, beyond people skills, the next quadrant is professionalism, right? Am I on time? Do I document? Do I follow up things properly? Do I take ownership? The things that we associate the professional does. And the last one is business acumen, or capturing it in a way. Did I make margin, right? Did I clear any money at the end? Because you can be great tech, you can be great with people, and you can detail your stuff. Everything's professional, but if you don't do it in a way that actually captures margin, then there's no money to get paid, and we all go out of business. So all 4 of those quadrants have to have skill in them for the business to succeed, and every person can make mistakes in any of those areas that destroy the organization.
Absolutely agree. And there's going to be a lot of MSP owners listening to this and say, yes, this is what I need my engineers to understand, which is why people, we're speaking with Dan and we're talking about this book because it really does match that disconnect. And following on from that, another lesson that you share in the book is titled Your Competence is Measured Beyond Your Tech Skills. The reason this struck a chord with me, the reason I think this lesson matters, is for a lot of what we've just talked about there.
Yes, sir.
I have worked with MSP engineers who have been done absolute rock stars. However, they marched to the beat of their own drummer. They were almost arrogant towards clients. The clients are getting in the way of them doing wonderful art with technology, or they were brilliant technicians, but had no people skills whatsoever. So talk a little bit more about that lesson. Your competence is measured beyond your tech skills.
So this became very clear as I sat in multiple meetings in my own organization at times, is you would see what you just said. You've got a brilliant individual, an engineer, and they're really strong, and they hold their worth and the value in that brilliance that's just there. But then if you've had a situation where you've had an engineer who's been banned from a client, right? I can't have so-and-so here anymore. Or you realize the client can't see the technical brilliance because they're not technically brilliant. It takes technical depth to perceive technical depth. But what they can perceive is if you're a professional or not, right? We all have an assumption of what a professional is. There's expectations, right? And those go out. Of course, we assume you know your craft, but we also assume that you follow up, you communicate, that you're detailed, you think ahead, you anticipate, all those different things, all those things that we associate with a professional. Now, you can be technically brilliant, but since I really can't see that and the results you produced weren't great, I'm going to measure you on those things beyond technology. And when you don't show those reliably, I can't trust you. I look at you as less of a professional, and it has nothing to do with your tech. It has to do with those other three quadrants that we just kind of mentioned of people skills, professionalism, and then business acumen, capturing it.
Yeah. And linking into that, my background is in corporate IT, and I want to share a story.
Sure.
My early part of the career in corporate IT, one of the things I took to the managed service provider industry was I learned standards, processes. So I attribute that corporate IT background to understanding, okay, can this scale? Can it work? But when I was in the middle of that, Dan, and I was an engineer, I was always driving my bosses up the wall because we would use, let's just say, IBM or Lenovo kit or whatever. And I'd say, well, we can get something cheaper here, or we can do better for. And so that idea of standards and processes was a lesson that I learned the hard way. But as an engineer, I was always looking to do, I can find a better way of doing this. So I think it's lesson number 4 in the book, standards and processes accelerate your success. Talk to us a little bit more about that. And just does the lesson that I've shared about corporate IT ring any bells with you?
Oh, you're dead on. You're dead on with how that goes. So that's kind of interesting. When you're in a smaller organization, or you're not in a big pool of engineers, and you're good, your pride and your sense of self, once again, is I can figure this thing out. And part of your identity is also the most creative way to figure it out, right? You're kind of one-upping everybody. So you're constantly looking to kind of prove that you can figure things out and there's a better way, which is great in so many ways. That drive, that skill, that troubleshooting is essential. But it comes to a point where if it's more than just you, uniformity starts to have a value. Can you imagine? So can you imagine being a service manager for the Toyota dealership, let's just say a car dealership, and when anyone comes to bring you the car, they ask you 2 questions, guaranteed. They're going to ask, before they hand the key over, they're going to say, how long are you going to have my car? And how much is it going to cost? So now the service manager's success is tied to setting and managing that expectation, cost, and time. And if they're really far off, doesn't matter if they fix it, you're going to be upset. Now imagine every time a car pulls into the service bay, and let's eliminate every type of Toyota and just stick it to one, because let's just say there's only one type of Toyota. Can you imagine if every time you open up that hood to look inside, or the bonnet, sorry, I apologize for our European listeners, but you open that up and it's different inside that engine compartment? How can you predictably tell them how long it's going to take and how much is it going to cost? So at some point you realize that standards and process and efficiency are necessary at scale. And we need to change our creative skills into slightly different areas versus trying to recreate a new car every time.
Yeah. And I don't want to overshare from the book, because I want everybody listening to this to go and buy a copy and read it. It's a phenomenal read. But one of the lessons that I took out of that was, we might think we're doing what's best for the client, but actually it's like, wow, okay, you found something better. But what does that look like if your colleague then walks up and opens the virtual hood, and finds something completely different? And as somebody who's just taken my Toyota Prius into the garage today, I'm glad Toyota has got standards and processes for that. So let's move forward with that. Lesson number 6 in the book I read as, you are measured based on your results. Now, this sounds so straightforward, but many engineers, in my experience, Dan, think that they should be measured on effort, not on results. So how would you help them understand this lesson?
I think you have to pull it back into something else outside of, let's use a metaphor outside of this to try and understand it a little deeper. If you go to buy a dozen eggs and you open up the carton, you're expecting a dozen eggs, right? Now, if you bought and paid for a dozen eggs and the carton looks like a dozen eggs and you open up and there's only 9 eggs in it when you get back from the store, you're going to get frustrated. And so much of results is about that expectation and what we should be producing. And that's how we're being measured at the end of the day. Unfortunately, they're not going to say, well, you know what, the people at the egg factory or the chickens or what, I expected the dozen eggs. I didn't get the dozen eggs. And in our industry or in life, outside of the tech side, if we pay for something or we're expecting something and it doesn't get delivered, we have a problem with it. Now, we're emotionally tied to it because I put in effort and I did try and give effort, or I did give effort. But on the receiving end, they didn't get what their expectation was. And that's what this is really about. It's not, I don't get to interpret what success is. Unfortunately, the person who bought it or the person who's paying for it, it's their version. And that disconnect can make it really frustrating. And we need to be aware of it.
It's so powerful. And the reason I would imagine it's later on in the book as one of the lessons is it's one of the advanced lessons we need to learn. And again, I've got to share a story here, Dan. When I was when I was an engineer working within my managed service provider business, we did quite a complex migration, a merger of 2 different Active Directories, getting techie here. We worked all weekend. We worked really, really hard and we did it. And from that perspective, it was awesome. Do you know what happened when we came in Monday morning? We showed people, hey, look, we've achieved the impossible. And we got complaint after complaint after complaint from the end users. And why? Because we'd not migrated their desktops. They'd lost all of their photos and things. Now, again, that sounds really silly. And there's going to be some MSPs listening to this and going, oh, I've been there. But a great example, isn't it, of what the expectation of the client and the results that the client expected was different from the effort the engineers put in there.
Yeah, it's painful. You forget the screensaver, you're a dead man. That's really it. I mean, even though from the first lesson, right? What's the big thing? It's a business, right? And even as you move forward, that expectation and what we're being measured on, we don't get to choose that. It's the person who's on the other side who's evaluating it. And it's a hard, I have to be reminded of that all the time. It's not something, we're selfish creatures often as we think, because I'm inside my head. I'm not inside yours, right? And so I have my own interpretation. And to step outside and look at the bigger picture, to constantly do that, sometimes it's not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And the final lesson in the book, amazing opportunity is within your grasp. It ends the book on an uplifting note. Can you give us any real world examples, Dan, of engineers you've worked with, and you've worked with a lot of great ones, but who've really impressed you, really inspired you?
I think it's interesting that you find that there's different levels of, you found some great technical people that just blow your mind on things they're able to do, right? Or some people that have phenomenal people skills and they're just able to put people at ease. And so each of those 4 quadrant areas, I've had experiences where people have just done wonderful things, but the ones that impress me quite heavily are the ones that go through multiple transformations and are humble enough to accept that there might be something, to what's being said, and then they examine it and they embrace it and they able to move forward. The engineer who starts to realize that it is a business and then starts making the changes and then helps other engineers grow so the whole team becomes more effective and deliver more. Those are the ones that just really impress me, because they're not only helping themselves, but they're helping others. And that's it for me. It's paying it forward.
I think from hindsight, I look back on my career and I would absolutely agree with you. The engineers actually who don't hold the data themselves, who don't hold the knowledge to themselves, who help their colleagues, give them colleagues a lift up. From the engineer's perspective, you might think, oh, I'm keeping my job safe by keeping the data, the knowledge, the information in my head. The reality is you become indispensable by being that guy who lifts up everyone around you, not only with knowledge, but with the way you conduct yourself and that. So, yeah, it's a powerful lesson, isn't it? And go ahead, Dan, sorry.
No. I'm nodding with you and agreeing with you. I mean, and the amazing opportunity is this. Every IT service company is in desperate need of more who can help lift the team and lift performance and raise business results. And I know we default say, well, raise technical results and you know, but really the business going first pulls everything else up, because as a business grows, it's a vacuum and it needs more talent, more resources, more abilities. There's more levels for opportunity. So once that increases up, it's just there. And so all of us as business owners are looking for that next person who can come in, marshal the group, raise everybody's performance that they're involved with, and that just lifts like a hot air balloon. And we're desperate for these people. We'll sometimes promote people that don't have it in hopes that there might be something there.
Yeah.
But we are so in need of, and actually it's outside of our industry, in professional services. These skills we're talking about are across all of us who interact with any other professional, any other service. You start to see the same problems exist there as they do in our industry. It's not unique to us, even though, yes, we feel we're special. As humans, we kind of have some similar patterns to us.
Yeah. So I hope we've given listeners a flavor of the book. And I would say for anybody listening, you know, if anything that we've talked about up until now, any of the lessons that we've shared struck a chord with you, this is going to be a book that you're going to want to check out. And Dan, I can see a lot of MSP owners not only reading and consuming the book, but then perhaps buying it for their engineering team to say, hey, have a read of this. I'm intrigued from your perspective. I know the book has only just been released. In my experience, books like this that are so powerful tend to be read by people who sort of already get it to a degree. And the people who need to hear this lesson the most are actually the least likely to read it. Does that make any sense? And if so, you know, how would you encourage MSP owners to get their engineers to actually take on board these lessons?
So funny you say that, because almost everything we do, and almost everybody listening to the podcast, I would imagine, is that top person in the organization or pretty high up in the organization. And so I do not believe that trickle-down education works. So this book, and I don't want anyone listening to be offended by this, but in truth was not written for the listener of the podcast right now.
Yeah.
This was written for every person underneath you, because you probably, or I'm going to guess, these lessons will resonate with you, but you kind of know them because you're running a business. The power comes is when all the other people on the pitch or the field with you know the same rules. Now, instead of you trying to explain it to them in between your crisis and you're running around and you staying billable and all the other stuff, there's just not enough time to get everyone else to understand it if you are the only one left to share it. So the real power and the way this was written was to distribute it everybody. And then you then use that as the catalyst to have conversations. Now, something that we haven't talked about, Richard, but I've also created the manager study guide for the book. And there is a manager study guide for each of the 7 lessons. And it takes you as a leader or a manager through the questions and the team activities that you sit your whole team down. And now you're going to review that first lesson. Okay, in the first lesson, that it's a business. Let's talk about what Marty saw. Has anyone felt that before? Let's talk about Chip, who is the mentor, his approach. What do we think about this? Now, in our business, where have we seen this? How would we do things differently? So this book becomes a way of getting everybody to start thinking more like what we say. Well, I want you to think like an owner. Well, what does that mean? Well, then you've got to know what these lessons are, and let's push it through the entire organization. So you are right on the tip of the iceberg of that, Richard, is really the power of this to help a MSP's business is to get everybody understanding the lessons and then using something like the manager study guide, which is free, to leverage those lessons across your organization.
We get a variety of people listening to the show. I know we get engineers listening to it as well as MSP business owners and things. So there's going to be, a wide variety of people here, but there are going to be some people listening and going, yeah, this sounds great, Dan. This sounds great, Rick. But I'm a smaller MSP. This is not, this sort of jazz is not going to apply to us. We've got, let's say, less than 10 engineers or whatever. What would you say to the nimble MSPs listening about how this book can help them?
I love that term nimble, because you are at the stage that really matters. The thing at the smaller scale is everything's on you as the owner, or maybe you're a manager you're number two in that organization. And you're going to find that as you scale, these lessons are either you're going to be following them and you're going to scale, or you're fighting against them and you can't figure out why you're not scaling. So these really are catalysts, and they apply to a 50, 100 person, 200, 500 person IT or service organization, and they especially apply to the smaller ones. If you want a business, once again, if it's about at the end of the day that you want to have a sustainable quality margin, that the business has value outside of you just having a busy work, a job, then these lessons matter.
What about for the larger MSPs? So I know we've got a decent number of MSPs who have got dozens of engineers as well. So perhaps there might be the opposite challenge where they just think, hey, I'm so far removed now from that engineering team. So how would you recommend this book could help a larger MSP?
So it's interesting, and having created training now that has to span the gap, you realize exactly what you're saying, Richard, is we all have this perception, that's not my problem. I don't have that. That's for those guys. I'm above that, or I'm below that. It doesn't fit me, right? At the end of the day, taking your technical skills and applying them in a way that converts to contributing to business success. Doesn't matter what size of an organization you're at. At the end of the day, if you're in a 5-person company, you've got to deliver services in a way that yields a margin, leftover money for the business. If you're in a larger organization, it's still the same thing. Your example of the individual taking 20 hours to do something that could only be billed for an hour or two is applicable if we're in a 5-person company, or if I'm in a team of 10 in a company of several hundred. The other amazing thing that matters, though, and I think this is critical, and this is funny because it's part of the story. Often the individual who has the potential to be your great leader, you have not identified. And it can be someone in the first level tech support. And they're just doing tech support tasks. But all of a sudden now they're aware, wait, this is a business. And this is now margin matters. And all of a sudden you'll see this spark. And somebody who really is an entry-level tech has aptitude at an operational level or strategic level, but they just haven't been given the food, the awareness. And all of a sudden you've got stars. In the MSP industry, if you look at the owners, if you look at the leaders, not all of us came from a traditional, I went to business school and all of a sudden we're here. We were a low-level tech at some point, and our aptitude drew us to a different area. This book, Upskill, my company, is all about giving the vitamins and understanding across everybody. So we don't know who's going to sprout, but we know there will be some that sprout. If an owner is only educating the people that they deem the smart one, or they deem their next leader, then 80-90% of the people on their staff, they are undernourishing, they are undereducating. And all you're doing is robbing yourself of the brain power that we brag about. Our people are our difference, but I only educate 2 of them. What? I've got to give everybody that, because still being the chairman, I don't want to tip my hat at certain individuals because of political stuff. But I will tell you, there's a couple people that came from the bottom that you look at them and their hunger and their ability and how they see things is like, and they're growing, and now they've been given promotions and opportunities. It's like, that's the gratifying stuff. You've got somebody who was on let's say a lower trajectory, and the trajectory that, because you've given them some insight in where they're going, their lives are changed. That's amazing stuff.
Wow. So powerful what you've shared there. And I think a great lesson for everybody listening. Talking of lessons, in the book, you've got, we talked about Marty as the protagonist, the main character there. We've got Chip, who is Marty's mentor. Wonderful character you've created there. Who would you consider your mentors in the MSP industry, Dan?
Let me just preface this. There's a lot of insight I've gained from many, many people, right? We only stand, if we can stand at a certain level and see something on the mountain, it's only because others have helped get us there. So, but that having been, and I came from several, HTG Evolve, and I was fortunate enough to have Arlen as one of my peer groups. And so Arlen was a phenomenal help for me and was patient with me as, he saw me go through some changes. I've also been fortunate that Brian O'Connell from Service Leadership has also been a very close friend and confidant, and helped me quite a bit too. But that would be, I feel bad singling a couple people and not pointing to every people, but there's been, I've gained so much from so many people.
And very gracious of you to mention the names that you have, but also to say there's so many other people, because people ask me that same question sometimes, and I say, look, I have been the beneficiary of the smartest, most successful people in the industry, and you know what? They gave freely of their time and experience to me. And I guess for the benefit of listeners, Dan and I have both mentioned HTG, Heartland's Technology Group, or as the kids would call it now, ConnectWise Evolve, and things like that. So if you're interested in what we're talking about, the peer group and how it influences people like Dan and myself, I did an interview with Dan Scott of IT Nation and ConnectWise Evolve all the way back in Tubb Talk 117, I think it was. So we'll include that in the show notes. Go and check that out if you want to know what this mystical HTG Evolve thing is that we keep mentioning on this show here. But you also mentioned, Arlen Sorensen. You and I were introduced by our mutual friend Ted Halsey of Snaptech IT, and Arlen Sorensen, who's one of your mentors, one of my mentors as well. I said the most successful, smartest people in the industry have taught me. Those are 2 of the names there. I've known Ted and Arlen for a long time, and when they recommend somebody, Dan, I pay attention, which is why it led to us, you and I, having the conversation here today. But tell me a bit more. What is the MSP, the Managed Service Provider community, meant to you, not just professionally, but personally? You,
as an MSP or a business owner or an MSP business owner, right, and especially from a technical background, you can feel alone, right? You can feel isolated. You can be overwhelmed. And having others who have at least carry the same burdens, they don't even have all the answers, but they carry the same burden. That sense of community is very, very helpful. And life's too short to just try and struggle through it by yourself. Yeah. And it's not just limited to the business side of it, but just the peers. We're humans. We need connection. We have emotion. We go through life. And I think it's important to have that. As the owner, you may think that your team and you're a friend of the team, but in truth, they still view you differently, and you can feel it. And so having somebody who actually doesn't have that, you're their boss, but you've experienced the same thing, that community is really powerful. So I strongly encourage you not to go at it alone, and find those that you can lean on, and they can lean on you, because sometimes there's things that you need to share.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We have spoke about the managed service community so often on this show. And I hope listeners now realize, this not just me, but so many people, very smart, successful people like Dan and others. This is a unique industry. So if you are not getting out there and getting involved in our community, please do yourself a favor. Go and get involved. The Tech Tribe or CompTIA or HGG, or whatever it looks like to you, even a local user group. There's no other industry like the managed service community for lifting you up and helping you, because as you say, Dan, it can be a lonely gig doing it on your own. Why would you do that to yourself?
So true. And then I will say this, sometimes there's the apprehension of these are my competitors and I don't want to give them anything, right? I don't want to, why, I'm not going to help. And the funny thing is if you ever feel like the businesses next to you are really your competitors, just do a quick assessment of what the real technical market spend would be in your marketplace. And most of us will find that we're a fraction of a percent of the real IT spend in any of our given market. And so we tend not to be the competitor that we think we are, unless you're in a really, really small town and there's only two of you. I get that. But most of us are in larger markets, and there's so much room for most of us. And if we all up our game, there's our clients themselves have more technical needs than many of us are supplying. So there's a lot of opportunity.
Well said. There's more than enough clients out there for all of us people. So let's work together on this one. So we've talked in this podcast about your book, The Tech Nerd's Guide to Career Success. It's now available on Amazon and other good booksellers as well there. Dan, what's the book that you've most recommended or gifted to other people, and why would that be?
Well, that's a loaded question, because that assumes that everybody I speak with is at the same spot in the journey.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna default. I'm gonna go back to one of the books that kind of made me swerve off the road when I was listening to it on cassette tape. Here, we're going old school again, right?
We talked about Novell, right? We talked about NetBuoy. Now we're talking cassette.
We're talking cassette, not 8-track, but cassette. So I remember getting E-Myth, Michael Gerber's E-Myth. And to me, that was just a slap upside the head that became a wake up call that was my first slap upside the head, is it's a business. It's not just about me being a nerd. And so that is probably the book that I've gifted or recommended the most towards small business owners. That's the first step of kind of going back, thinking about systems, thinking about what you're producing, why we're producing it, and how I'm going to go about doing that. I think that's really the cornerstone for me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, one of the 3 books that I hold up that were genuinely life-changing for me personally and professionally as well. I remember reading in 2003, I'm going to say, and it rocked my world. I actually looked over my shoulder down, probably similar to your reaction, and went, is this guy been spying on me because he's writing this book about me?
Yes.
And I know so many other people have read that book, have had a similar reaction. So again, for newer listeners, if you've not checked out the E-Myth, we'll include it in the show notes. Absolutely phenomenal book that you should go and check out. Thanks for sharing that one, Dan.
Agreed.
So we talked about the book. We've talked a little bit about your background as well. Thank you for sharing so openly and honestly. And I'm also intrigued, the book is really the tip of the iceberg here. You've also got lots of training and other valuable resources for MSPs and engineers. Tell us a little bit more about what's going on in your world in terms of that.
Well, so the company that I've started that wraps up this training or this education process is called Upskill, just up-skill. And really what I realized is I admitted to you that my first pass of the book was more like a manual than a book. So I started thinking about all the things, the information that we all need to know it's kind of like the manual for success, but not just for the owner, but for the managers, the people that are the influencers in the organization, and the people that are doers. The doers are influencers too. They're influencing clients, they're influencing each other. So the impact everybody has is significant. And so the whole idea was to give the people the skills and the understanding of what the real thing we're doing here, and then let the ones that have the aptitude pop up and become your next level leader. So the book is kind of an intro to that concept, the study guide to help you take your whole team through these things and talk about a cost-effective lift. The book's relatively cheap, a few bucks, a pounds, whatever. And then the manager study guide free if you just reach out. I've also created courses on what it is to be a professional. So a service professional. If you have people that are coming into your team and they got great tech skills and they got some basic people skills, well, the whole concepts of professionalism, how we're measured, and then how we contribute or hurt the business, right? You can help the business, you can hurt the business by your actions. And both of those have, an impact. And at a minimum, we want all our people to do things that don't hurt us. Right? As you said, don't destroy my margin. If I've got a fixed fee project, don't make it unprofitable for me. If I have a fixed engagement, don't make it unprofitable for me. If I don't, those are the penalties. So let's teach everybody what the penalties are. Let's teach everybody how we score and what the benefits are, and at least minimize those things that are killing us. And then create a strategic level. There's also a core concepts course, which teaches people the difference between some of the core business models, right? If you're a fixed fee client or a fixed fee versus time and materials versus project work or recurring, each of those have different levers that need to be adhered to for success. And unfortunately, if you're people making decisions, a manager who's over a pod or a team of people that do all those types of work, but they don't understand which ones, what to do in each scenario. Oh, sorry, I've got an apple and I've got fireworks going off because I moved my hands. You can't see that in radio.
I was going to say, not a good scene for podcasts, but what just happened as Dan and I were talking, he must have made a gesture to the screen and a load of virtual fireworks went off in the background. So I was going to say it woke me up. Not that I was falling asleep, but it gave me a jolt. So, yeah.
Right. But that's it. It's about teaching the people these basics because we're asking them to make decisions. So there's course level to that next level so they understand, why we're driving the KPIs, how we're leveraging culture, the actions that build trust or destroy trust, right? The actions that contribute to margin, the concept of exchanging value and those things. So the coursework is all about getting all of your people up to being ready to contribute. And then you add how you do things in your business that are unique. This at our company, this is how we do X, Y, and Z. But all my content's based about just giving you stronger players, stronger contributors.
Yeah. And I think it is much needed in our industry as the industry matures, evolves to the next level. So thank you for putting it out there. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us, Dan. We appreciate it. And I think this is going to be not only the book, but your courses is going to be a big hit with MSPs all over the world. And for the benefit of listeners, we will include everything that we've talked about, the link to the books, not just Dan's book, but the books that we've recommended as well in the show notes. So go to tubblog.co.uk for the blog post that accompanies this episode. Dan, as we come to an end here, and it's been absolutely phenomenal, my friend. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I know it took us a while to get to the point where we could sit down and chat for, while being recorded as well. But I really enjoyed it. Thank you for your time today.
Honored and enjoyed the time immensely myself as well.
And if anyone listening wants to continue the conversation with you, or indeed wants to find out more about Upskill, the book, anything else, obviously we've got the show notes, but how could they find you directly? Are you on the social medias and things of that nature?
I'm a little socially shy, let's just say it that way, but actually just Adams at up-skill.com is a perfect way to do it, or up-skill.com is the website, and you can reach me there. And be honored to hear from you at the same time, even if it's just for the manager study guide. We'll get you set up so you're receiving those to take your team to that next level.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your time today, Dan. And I'm going to drop a message to Ted and Arlen after this to say thank you for connecting me with what has been one most wonderful guest here. So I really appreciate your time, Dan.
Honored again. Thank you, Richard.
Hey folks, Richard here. Thanks for listening today. I know you've got a ton of options for who you listen to nowadays, so I really appreciate your support. Do you have any feedback on this episode? Ideas for future guests? Tweet me at Tubblog using the hashtag TubbTalk. I respond to every tweet and really appreciate your feedback. Hey team, this is Richard again. Just one more thing before you take off, and that is MSP Insights. Now, every Tuesday, I share my thoughts on the business of IT with you, the managed service community. Thousands of managed service providers already subscribe to MSP Insights. It's easy to sign up, easy to cancel. MSP Insights is basically a short email from me every Tuesday without fail with advice on growing your IT business, plus cool resources I've found, discovered, or started exploring that week. It's kind of like my diary of cool things, and often includes articles or books I've read, tools I've discovered, and events I think you'd be interested in, often sent to me by my friends and Tubb Talk podcast guests. So, if that sounds fun, a short tiny bite of MSP goodness every Tuesday, and you'd like to try it out, just go to go.tubb.co/Tuesday. That's go.tubb.co/Tuesday. Drop in your email and you'll get the very next one. Thanks for listening.